Hey everyone, happy Wednesday. We're going to talk today about something that you've been doing some reading about as well as watching some videos about, and that is elements, molecules, and compounds. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about what does each of those words mean and what's the difference between those three things. They're all related to each other, but when you say something is an element, something is a molecule, and something is a compound, that means something just a little bit different. So we're going to start today with elements right over here on the left-hand side. Now, before I get started today, you should make sure that you have done what the instructions said to do on Edlio. You should have the two worksheets printed out. One has this on it as well as some lines for a paragraph and some smaller pieces at the bottom to cut out. The other one is two reading passages side by side. They're the same reading passage, so you can cut it in half. You can recycle one of those halves, but keep the one half for your journal. So if you haven't printed those out yet, hit pause, go do that. If you don't have access to a printer and it doesn't work, then just flip your science journal on its side, go to the next empty page, and make a page that looks just like this one. And then when you're done with that, you can go ahead and hit play. So if you need to do either one of those things right now, stop the video and then come back. All right, so today we're going to talk about elements, molecules, and compounds. Now, these three things are all related to, number one, the periodic table that we've been learning about, and every single thing that this whole universe is made of. So we're going to start off with element because we've touched on this one before, and by now you guys should know pretty much what an element is. But we're doing it all together with molecules and compounds to make the other two make sense. So let's just start off with element, and you guys are going to go ahead and write down on your paper the same thing that I'm writing here onto my whiteboard. All right, so an element, what exactly does that mean? So that is, an element, like we said before, is one of the 118 substances, basically, that make everything. And remember, we said that these substances are kind of like the ingredients of a recipe. They combine in different ways, and they combine in different amounts, and there's just an infinite number of combinations, and all those different combinations go to make every single thing that you see around you, in your home, outside, in the world, things that are man-made, things that are in the natural world, 118 elements, that's it. The elements are also the simplest form of everything. You cannot get more simple than an element. If you have one atom that's one element, you cannot further break it apart and have it still be that same thing. If you break an atom apart, it just breaks into its individual protons, neutrons, electrons, quarks, and other crazy things that it's made of. But it will no longer be the substance that we called it as that element. All right, so let's just write down a few examples. Now, some of these are those little pieces at the bottom of your paper, and you can put them onto your chart here when you're all finished. But one of those examples, for example, would be Na. So that is one of the elements on the periodic table. We also have others. There's one called Ca. Sort of like California, but that's not what it stands for. You can go look it up because you have access to a periodic table. And on the periodic table, often, what we have are these boxes. And, at the top, you have the atomic number and then the name and the atomic mass. So you guys are really familiar with what elements are, but the most important thing to know is that an element is the tiniest form of whatever the substance is that you're talking about, and it can't be broken down any further. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. What is a molecule? What do molecules have to do with elements? Well, that's a pretty easy one. So molecules are formed when two or more, more, elements combine. So if you take two of these elements from the periodic table and you stick them together, you have just now made a molecule. So a molecule can be just two elements put together. It can be two of the same element. So for example, you might have an element called CO2. Now that probably sounds familiar to you because we used that one earlier in the year when we were talking about plants. So this is carbon and this is oxygen. Now that little 2 is kind of a special symbol. This is important. So this little symbol right here has a name, and I'm going to pause here to tell you about it. It's called a subscript. Subscript. Now a subscript is a tiny number that hangs off the bottom of an element. What it tells you is how many atoms there are of that element in this molecule. So what that means here is that we have, here's an atom, and it's a carbon atom. Now stuck to it are 2 oxygen atoms, like this, okay? So that's what that means. We have a carbon atom stuck to 2 oxygen atoms, and those 3 atoms stuck together make what we call a molecule. Here's another example that's probably really familiar to you. H2O. So you'll see that this one here has a subscript, and that tells you that there are 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen molecule. Because the O does not have a subscript, that means there's just the one that's here. So you guys probably have seen models of this one too. We've got H2O. So hydrogen and 2 oxygens. Now sometimes they get more complicated, and we'll talk about that when we get over here into compounds. But a molecule means simply that more than one atom has connected together to make something new. Now, the thing that those molecules make are called compounds. So a compound, and I'm going to move my board over here so I don't have to move my whole self. So a compound is basically the substance formed when 2 or more atoms combine. That's all it means. So if you have a molecule, it just means there's a bunch of atoms stuck together. If you have a compound, well, it's a molecule, but what that molecule forms is actually called the compound. So for example, one of the compounds that's really common in your house and that's also used by scientists is this one, baking soda. So this is a compound that was created by several atoms joining together. And when they join together, it really means that they share their electrons. Their electrons all spin around their own atom as well as their neighboring atoms that are stuck to them, and that's what holds it together. So baking soda is kind of an interesting, what we call formula here. So it's made of several things. We've got Na, we've got H, we've got C, and then how many oxygen atoms do we have? Well, this means that there are 3. So this baking soda atom, when we go to draw out the model of how the atom is put together, it would look something like this. Na, H, C, and then 3 oxygens. So basically, whenever you see a formula like this, it's a recipe for a very specific compound. And in this case, the compound is baking soda. Now, everything else in the universe is put together with formulas that look like this. This is a very, very simple formula. Some of them get huge. Now, what you're going to do today is you're going to go and you're going to finish putting together your worksheet. So down all those little pictures at the bottom, you should kind of be able now to figure out which ones go under element, molecule, or compound. And what I'd like you to do with the part of it that has the pencil and the paragraph is simply read the directions for what it says at the top, and I'd like you to write at least 3 sentences that answer that question at the top, all right? Now, the last thing that you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and with that multi-paragraph little essay that's written about atoms, molecules, and compounds, I'd like you to please go through that and annotate it according to the items that I listed on my Edlio page. So you can go ahead and glue that on the next empty page of your journal after this one. And then I'd like you to spend some time going through and annotating for any words that you don't know, anything that surprises you, and also anything that you've heard someplace else before, okay? So I hope you learned a little bit more today. In addition, today I'm going to have one more video at the end that is a teacher briefly kind of going over this, but she's going to add one more thing to this information today. So go ahead, do these things, finish up this, finish up the annotations, and then watch that little video just to wrap up the idea of the concepts covered in this lesson. Okay? So I will see the rest of you. I will see the yellow class today at 2. I will see the red class tomorrow at 2. And then blue class, change of time on Friday. Remember, we talked about this on Monday. The time we're going to be meeting on Friday is 10 o'clock a.m. And for those of you whose power is going to be out, I know there's a lot of you who your electricity is not going to work. I will post on Edlio, just like I always do on Friday, the 2 o'clock Zoom session content for the week, so you'll be able to go ahead and access that. All right? So email me if you have questions, and I hope you guys have a great Wednesday. I'll see you soon. Bye.